Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm so honored to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, child and teen development specialist, author, and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two great kids who give me the opportunity to love, learn, and grow every single day, whether I want to or not. Believe me, I get it. It's not always easy. But as you know by now, we're in this together, and we have some wonderful people helping us along the way. Now, learning to read seems like a rite of passage for our little ones. We start with our ABCs and move on to more complex words and phrases. I still remember when my own little ones started putting letter sounds together and making words. It was so exciting. Many children enjoy reading and do it often at home and in school, at our local libraries and in waiting rooms, but not every child is an avid reader, and not every child learns to read with ease. So how do we help our reluctant readers thrive, and how do we inspire our less interested readers to love literacy? For these answers, I have a wonderful guest who is actually a teacher to help us help our kids love to read. Alex Corbitt is a middle school English teacher in the Bronx, New York. His work focuses on socio-emotional learning, gamification, education technology, and literacy. He loves learning from other teachers, and he regularly presents at conferences around the United States. And I follow him on Twitter because not only does he share some of my own infographics on how to talk to kids about different topics and how to start conversations about respect and focus and other types of things, but he shares some incredibly relevant and interesting infographics from other educators who are doing really important work to get our kids to love learning in all different areas. And I know he didn't say this in his own bio to me, but he's had a lot of recognition for being a distinguished educator. And I get the sense that he's very well loved and he's innovative, and we've got a lot to learn from him. So speaking of learning, we've got a lot to learn today. We are so grateful you are here. So welcome, Alex Corbitt, to How to Talk to Kids About Anything.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robyn, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm thrilled you're here. It's so fun when we, meet over social media, and then here you are. It's our first conversation in person, but I feel like, we've gone back and forth on social media. It's just so much fun to actually get to talk live.
Sit down and talk. Yeah.
So before we get into the meat of the matter, for those who haven't had the opportunity to meet you or see you speak, what gets you up in the morning, and how did you get so interested in the area of children and literacy?
What gets me up in the morning regarding education, or just in general?
Well, in general, what's the passion that sort of gets you out of bed and gets you going?
I think, I hope this doesn't sound corny, but I like to laugh. And I think I originally, when going into education, saw myself teaching like 11th grade or seniors in high school and talking about very, classic canonical literature. Mm-hmm. But then I had the fortune of being placed when I was a student teacher in a middle school classroom, and I learned how funny middle schoolers are and how much they make me laugh and they crack me up. So I think, I do teach English. Literacy is my passion. But when you ask what gets me up in the morning, I think just being silly and having fun with my kids and kind of connecting that way is what gives me kind of the energy to keep going.
Well, I'm sure your kids love that about you. So what got you so interested in literacy in particular?
Yeah. So I think being able to read is such an important part of being a citizen, whether, when it comes to voting or keeping up on the news, or now digital citizenship is such an important aspect of our lives and our digital footprint, what information about ourselves we put out into the world, how we analyze the information that is bombarding us from every which direction. And so I think being an informed, empowered citizen is really dependent on your ability to read, write, and think critically. So I do love to read. I get a lot of enjoyment out of like reading fiction and all that kind of stuff. But really what it comes down to for my kids, I think, is I want them to be kind of empowered.
It's so sweet that you call your students your kids. I just love that about you. It makes it so that we know how much you care, and who doesn't love a teacher that really truly cares in the way that you do. So my kids are very big on reading. They love it. Our problem is usually getting them to stop reading at night, go to bed.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I know. And I don't actually even complain about it. It's just, it is an argument every once in a while. My son was just telling me tonight, he's like, but I didn't get a chance to read, and I need some new books from the library because I've read all of these, so it's just a different bunch of problems. But I was talking to some other parents, and obviously, in doing the work that I do when I present at schools and I present for parents, I often hear about their struggles. And one of them is actually getting their kids to read. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
So first, I want to ask you, why are some kids reluctant readers? And then, if we can maybe go into some teachers' tips, like some teachers' secrets on how to inspire those reluctant readers to read when they really would rather not. So first, why do we have some reluctant readers, and then go for the tips?
Yeah. And I guess I'll just kind of preface this with saying, although I am a teacher, and this is kind of, these questions are what I try and wrap my head around, on a daily basis. I am far from, a guru, or I don't know all the answers. So
do any of us know all the answers? We're just trying to piece this together here.
Right. And it's really hard work that takes dedication. And I mean, as you know, every child is so different, and what works for one child might not work for another. So it's really, there's a lot of trial and error and testing. So, as we discuss things, maybe I'll just kind of frame it with, here are some strategies.
Yes.
Maybe some of them will work. Maybe some.
That's what we're looking for. Not
absolutely.
I will never think that all these strategies are going to work for all the children, and that is such an important point that I'm just going to throw high beams on right there for all of our listeners. That one tip that works for you may not work for your neighbor or the kid down the street. But if you hear one thing today that stimulates reading for your kid, then this is a success. So we're no pressure in terms of getting, the global, this is how your kid's going to learn to read and love reading. I'll just say that, but we're just kind of throwing some stuff out there, and something's going to stick to each one of our listeners.
That sounds great. So going back to your question, why are some kids, students, children, reluctant readers? There's, so many reasons why, but I think some of the big reasons, one might be because, in my classroom, for example, I have students who are as many as like 5 grade levels below, where they should be at. I teach 7th grade middle school, but I have some students who are at a 2nd grade reading level. And so one reason why I might have a student who struggles or who is reluctant to read is because it's hard for them and they're frustrated. Some students would rather not read than be vulnerable, try to read, and visibly struggle. I mean, how embarrassing could that potentially be if they're not in an environment that's supportive? And, students like that, I don't blame at all. If I wouldn't want to read aloud or, put myself out there if I felt so vulnerable to maybe being teased or not getting the answer right, or being seen as, quote unquote dumb, which,
right.
And so I think for these students, what I recommend is there are books called high interest, low lexile books.
Mm-hmm.
So they're books specifically for, let's say, middle school and high schoolers who might read far below grade level, but the content of the story is for their age, but the lexile level is low. So it's like high interest, low lexile level.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I have a high schooler, or let me say a seventh grader who's reading at a second grade reading level, they're not going to want to read, Frog and Toad
You're
chapter
right.
books. That's
You're
not
absolutely right. I was wondering about that. That's exactly right. Oh, okay, great.
And so the past 10 years in YA Lit has been so important, and for a number of reasons, but high interest, low lexile level is one of them. And these books do exist by a lot of publishers, and maybe I can send you some links to include in the footnotes.
I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And for these, and then another good resource for students who are frustrated or struggling is graphic novels or comics. Now, let me preface that by saying there are some graphic novels. I mean, anything by Alan Moore or, The Watchmen, those are like really challenging graphic novels. So I'm not trying to say that all comics and graphic novels are simplistic or simple, but the plain fact of having pictures is a great entry point for students and helps them decode and understand what's going on in the story. So that's another resource for struggling readers. A third is going back to the idea of culture, establishing a growth mindset in your classroom, to touch on Carol Dweck's research. Which I'm sure you guys have talked about at length.
We have talked about, but let's reiterate what what we're talking about here, because folks who have been listening to this podcast for a while, probably on Jessica Leahy's podcast that I did with her, and numerous other ones we've talked about Carol Dweck's work, but I think it really begs refreshment right here. So let's talk about it a little bit.
And I'm again not an expert, but the basic idea is she did a study where she took two groups of students. One group, she reinforced the idea of them being smart, and then the other group of students, she reinforced the idea of them trying hard and giving their best effort. Right. And what the research showed is that telling kids that they're smart can sometimes inhibit their ability to learn new information, because they're worried about maintaining that reputation of being smart, so they don't take risks, they don't go out of their comfort zone. But students who are praised for their effort and their ability to be creative and problem solve, be vulnerable, all these things that we hope struggling readers to do, those students in studies have shown to be more successful when given like a test to kind of aggregate how they're doing. So the reason why I bring that up is I think how we message reading to our kids is very important, emphasizing not getting the correct answer or being quote unquote smart, but being creative, putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, asking questions. Hey, that was a great question. You clarified so much for us. We learned so much from your wondering or your question. I think developing that growth mindset in readers might help bring them out of their shell if they're anxious and they're struggling. So those are some strategies for our struggling reader category. Right. Another reason why some kids are quote unquote reluctant readers might be because the books that we're giving them don't reflect their identities. So classically, in schooling, the type of literature we provide our students is predominantly by white men, often dead, straight, coming from a very heteronormative kind of perspective. And this reaches only a very small fraction of our kids. And our kids need to be able to look into books and see themselves reflected back at them. So we need to bring into the classroom LGBTQ literature. We need to bring in diverse books that explore a variety of cultures and experiences.
Different protagonists.
Definitely.
Yes.
Especially empowered female protagonists.
Sure.
So I don't really blame the students who, quote unquote, supposedly don't like reading if we're only giving them books that privilege or center one type of person.
Right.
So I really think we need to rethink curriculum. I think we need to rethink the way we provide students with books and what types of identities are we centering when we give kids different types of books.
What an important idea to be able to read something where you see yourself reflected back at you. I think it's very important because you want to feel connected to what you're reading. You want to feel that what you're reading is a reflection of you and is interesting to you. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and validating and a good book should help us understand ourselves better, right? And should ask us questions that make us think more deeply and make us feel valued. So absolutely, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And just a third group of, quote unquote, I use quotes because, maybe it's not that they're reluctant, maybe we're just not meeting their needs. So just but another reason why students might not be jazzed about reading, so to speak, might be because of low attention span due to, iPhones, video games, the abundance of technology that provides so many distractions. And just having the time to kind of unplug and focus just on reading or reading with a device, but trying to tune out other distractions and make that time for reading sacred and build that stamina and attention span in our kids.
I want to jump into that a little bit more. We have talked a lot about technology on this podcast with Common Sense Media and Devorah Heitner and Sue Sheff and a bunch of others that have gone into warning us about tech, but also using tech. Eric Sheninger has been on, George Couros in Your World, where we're talking about innovation and technology. And a lot of our listeners, they have a lot of tech in their households. We have a lot of tech in our schools. My child is part of a specialized classroom called Laddie, where they learn with all different types of technology. And we live in a push button culture where questions are answered in a flash and curiosities are satisfied in a click of a button. It's like, hey, how much does a whale weigh? Done. And I think of my own childhood. If I want to learn how much a whale weighs, I was going to the series of encyclopedias in my brother's room and, labeled A, B, C, D, and onward, and taking that encyclopedia out by hand and leafing through and looking up whales in W. So, that took some time, and then you actually needed to read it. So given all of this, how do we create a culture of reading in our homes and in our schools beyond saying, let's, kind of put down the distraction? What else can we do?
That's a great question. So I think it's very important when we're trying to create a culture of learning to first, students need access. Like, you can't have a culture of reading without access to books. So whether it be, going online is a perfectly valid way, or having an ebook is a perfectly valid way of getting books. But in my classroom or in my home space, I have a lot of books available in every room, and that is it's kind of a centerpiece of the environment. And so I think that allows for me or for my kids at school to kind of get inspired and just to kind of explore. So I think rethinking kind of the environment. I mean, having even, in our homes with kids, having magazines or books or, papers in the bathroom, like that's a great opportunity.
Yeah, they're doing nothing. They might as well.
Yeah. So like just kind of saturating the space with texts. And then in addition to that, when we talk about building a reading culture, we need to remember that we are models for our kids. And kids look to adults as and they're very good at imitating, right? And they're very good at looking at us and kind of taking our lead a lot of the times. Sometimes not. Sometimes in middle school, friends are more important than, me or a teacher. Right. And I get that. But when it comes to literacy, I'm very aware that I need to be modeling what it means to have a reading life. So I always try to share the books or the short stories or the articles that I'm reading with my kids. Sometimes it's just, a silly thing or something. It's funny or something that I found very interesting. Or maybe I'm talking to a student who's kind of working through a problem, and I'm like, you remind me of this situation, in this book, and maybe it really meant a lot to me. Maybe this would kind of be inspiring for you. And then I say that with the caveat of being very real with kids. So even though I'm an English teacher, I don't kind of coat everything in this like sugar sweet tone, like, oh, aren't books wonderful? And, I'm very clear and vulnerable with my kids. Just because I'm an English teacher doesn't mean I'm a perfect reader. I tell the kids, and this is true, I read very slowly. I'm easily confused. I prefer pictures. I love graphic novels. I have a very short attention span. It's something I struggle with.
Sure. You sound just like my kids, like this, every single thing you've said so far.
I mean, and I think it's also just what it means to be human. I mean, we're just not these perfect, even, the big English teacher, in front of the room or working with kids, we're all human. We're all, we have struggles. I have tons of books that I don't like, but I still love reading. But there are lots of books I don't like. And I think that kind of blows the minds of my kids to hear me say those things.
Right.
But I think it also adds to my credibility as somebody who's trying to get them to read, because I'm being very honest with them.
And you get them. You're reading their minds in a lot of ways. You hit on something also where you're like, what? I don't like all books. I'm like not interested in all these books. And to get kids to read, sometimes it's about hitting their interest, right? I mean, it may be that they're not interested in reading that classic book that maybe we often see in school, and they don't want to read Frog and Toad, and they don't want to read classic Handmaid's Tale. They don't want to read that, but they do want to read about oceanography, or they want to read about rocks, and you're thinking that sounds terribly boring, but for them, they see a magazine with a big volcano on it, and they're like, yeah, that sounds good. So, in creating a culture of reading, maybe part of it is remembering that we have to reflect their interests, not just kind of what we want them to read, right?
Absolutely. And that goes into, allowing space for student choice and not being kind of at the whim of a curriculum within the school space, I should say. Sure. Not keeping to a strict curriculum, or if we're talking to parents at home, not only offering kids all the those wonderful books that we liked as kids, but to be very open-minded and maybe a little less structured, perhaps, and allowing for our kids to step up, be front and center, and kind of show us what they're interested in. And you made a point that kind of resonated with me. There are definitely things that my kids are interested in that I'm just not. And I'll make that very clear. I'm like, oh, wow, like, you know that much about that? Like, I never even thought about that. Or, or jokingly, if I have a good relationship with a kid, I'll be like, oh my God, you're such a nerd about that kind of thing.
Right.
And they kind of grin and they love that.
Sure.
Like, they love being the expert.
Yes.
And, me being a little self-deprecating and kind of deferring to them as the expert in the room. That must feel
great.
Oh, I mean, it's empowering. And who doesn't like being in that position where, they have something to bring to the table.
Yeah, teach the teacher, teach the parent.
Definitely.
That's an amazing position to be in. And I it's funny when you're saying, like, in the school space and in the home space being less strict. I have talked to some of my friends and even people who have talked to me about this as an expert, and they've said, well, my kid wants to read Captain Underpants and, these graphic novels. And they kind of like, this is totally not what I'm like, what are they reading? Like, this is not what I want them to read. In fact, like, this grandmother was like, I'm not buying that for you, pick a real book. And, so it does say that we do need to allow more room so that the kids are picking what they want to read, because once they find things that they love to read and then they learn that they love reading, they're going to read a lot more than just that book that you just poo-pooed, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's like the entry point. That's them sticking their toe in the water, getting used to the temperature. But once, if a book asks a certain number of questions, or even if they just fall in love with the author, and then they realize that, that author is also, in addition to comics or graphic novels, they've also written chapter books and big novels or essays. It's just, it becomes a good slippery slope after that. And that's something that we want our kids to kind of fall into. So you're absolutely right. Like, don't censor what kids read and let them go at their own pace. And there might be, the progress might be, kind of slow going, but then, and this definitely happened in my life, there were those few critical years when something just clicked, and then I started reading so much. I mean, honestly, my senior year in high school was a big moment for me, where like it was this weird moment where like all of my friends were like really big into reading. I had a lot of like kind of musician friends. I played music. I was in a band. And so usually our conversations were mostly about, music or, shows. But there was this critical moment when I was like 17, 18, where books were front and center. And that summer, I read more than I had, the previous 2 or 3 years. So just being patient and letting those moments come to our kids, not pushing it, and just having faith that if we are just surrounding them in this world of books and choice and options, that things will click on the timetable of the kid, not our time.
Yeah. It's interesting because my daughter and my son, they're only 16 months apart, but so they share a lot of books, even though my daughter's a little bit ahead, but they both love reading and they both love graphic novels. And I've seen how the graphic novel for both kids that was the entry point. And my daughter has since, even though she still loves the graphic novels, then moved on to books that had more text but still pictures, thinking like the Captain Underpants, Dork Diaries, and some of the other, books that kind of have that structure. And then actually even moved into regular chapter books from there. So I've seen that progression. And now my son, who's in second grade, has been reading these graphic novels. And I suggest that to so many people. I'm like, listen, like it was the answer for us. You know, he devours them. There's never enough of them in our room. And he is reading more complex ones. He definitely loves reading. And I just am thinking to myself, I've already seen how this progresses. So I'm just being patient about it, even though it's like, yeah, would I like you to just sit down and read a regular, you know, chapter book? Yeah, but he's doing that in school, and eventually he's going to do that at home because it's just going to happen. So I appreciate what you're saying there, and let's not downplay, you know, that entry point, which could be a graphic novel or something that has large pictures and maybe more minimal text. And actually a lot of pages, you know, some of these books have a lot of pages.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And just to reiterate, I know I said this earlier, but and I think this is where you're going with it. You know, graphic novels are highly complex texts,
They can
especially,
be, yes.
I should say they can. You're right, they can be. I mean, like I said, Watchmen by Alan Moore. Yes. One of my favorite texts of all time is Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. And it was one of the most challenging texts I've ever read. And it's a graphic novel. It's a memoir graphic novel. And I mean, Alison Bechdel is brilliant. And I that would be way too hard for my seventh graders. I mean, that graphic novel is studied at the university level.
So neat.
So
wow.
Yeah, I don't want our listeners to think that, you know, graphic novel is the beginning point, because I mean, some kids need to work up to that too.
Sure.
So
no, that's a good point. That's a good point.
It can coexist at a lot of different levels, but you're right that it's the pictures, and that's very immediately engaging to kids. Yes. And it's certainly a great
and
entry.
It's familiar to them. They've
Yes.
just come off of picture books, and you know, so and we still do read picture books in our house, like out loud at night. But you know, it's like feeling like you're home still. You're still in this familiar setting. There's still pictures. You're not being given, you know, your parents' books. You know, you're given something that has pictures, and it feels good. So, you know, I think that makes a lot of sense for our readers and for our kids. You know, it's often we're talking in this podcast about scripting and how we can actually talk to kids about these different topics. So let's say you have a student or a child who often defaults to video games or iPads or screen time. And after listening to this podcast, you know, the parent, the teacher, they really want them to be reading more. And they're saying, okay, well, maybe I can use some kind of strategy here. So what might we say? Or what questions might we ask of a child or a student that might get them to sort of get on the reading train with you? You know, not just like having it in the room, and not just sort of, you know, encouraging because you're a teacher or you want it as a parent. But what might you say to a younger child or an older child that may have not been reading very much, and now you're thinking, we should try this again?
That's a great question. Maybe I can answer it with a little bit of a story
I would love
and a
that.
script.
Awesome.
Okay.
Fabulous. You like read my mind.
Because, you know, when I think of it, I tend to think of it more in anecdotals than like a sentence frame necessarily.
We
but
love
I'll
that.
try and do my best. So two movies that have been that already, well, two movies. So Annihilation, which came out, I think, a month ago. And then on Friday, we have the new Avengers movie, Infinity War, coming out. Both of those movies, you know, action, horror, are highly appealing to young kids, like middle school and up. So those are both pull very heavily from books. So
that's true.
So a lot of my kids who play video games or love going to see action movies, they might not even realize that a lot of these things pull from stories. So I started recently reading Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and I did a book talk to my kids. So instead of like pestering them and telling them to read, what I'll do, the approach I'll take is I'll give them like a little trailer of my own about what the story is about. And it's about this, mysterious area called Area X. And there have been 11 groups that have gone to explore it, but everyone's either gone missing or have died. And now there's a 12th group that's being sent in to investigate. And what's going on here, and why have the other people? Why is it a big secret? Why is the government covering it up? And at that point, when I'm kind of sharing that kind of book trailer with my kids, that's when they're leaning in and they're like, well, what happens next? And then it's like, and that's when you try and be slick and you just slide the book over.
No.
And it's like, now it's your turn. And I think moments like that are the best way to get kids interested.
It's so brilliant to use like a movie trailer to advertise a book. Like that's so brilliant as a teacher. I love that.
And so much less like I think there's a lot of implicit judgment when it's like, oh, you should be reading more, or why don't you like this book? Like there's a lot of kind of emotional weight behind that.
Right.
Whereas when we fall in love with reading, it's because it's fun and joyful and exciting. Yes. And if we can kind of capture that and entice kids with the very thing that brings us to books and us to reading, then we're kind of talking the same language.
It's interesting you talk about this in terms of these books that have sort of been made into movies, or books that are movies that are based on books. Because with my own daughter, we've done our own version of that, this sort of younger version. And I'll just I'll just say that we love to read together some of the classics, Wizard of Oz, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, Matilda, Heidi. All of those have movies.
There you go. Yeah,
so we start with reading the book, which I have told her, please note that the book is always better than the movie.
Right.
Even though the movie's going to be great, the book is always better, and you'll kind of see differences and all of that. It's really exciting for us to be able to read The Secret Garden and then have a special mother-daughter day where we actually watch The Secret Garden after, we finish the movie. And then we sort of talk, oh, well, this is different, and this sort of surprised me. And it's fun. It's kind of a way to take the new technology, or sometimes it's old because some of these movies are definitely old, that you can incorporate the digital aspect or the visual aspect with something you read, and it kind of makes it special. Like, it's kind of special cuddle time for us as well. It's like fun, fun for us, and we can't wait till the next one. Like, what's the next thing that we're going to read? And then we're going to watch the movie after, because the book was so good that they made it into a movie. And,
so, maybe I'm kind of showing my age or lack thereof.
I think I did too, just now.
No.
Little Women.
No. That's amazing. But I think I was in like middle school or high school, and my mom. First of all, there's no wrong age, or your kids are never too old to read with them. Like I still love it when people read to me.
Nice. Because that was one of my questions. Like, are we supposed to stop? Because we haven't stopped yet. So thank you for that.
No, I mean, we can do a second podcast, Dr. Robyn, where you read stories to me, and I'll just listen.
Oh, that'll be so interesting for everybody. Listen to Dr. Robyn read.
And then my responses will just be, I like that.
Interesting.
But my mom read the first Harry Potter book to me to get me interested. But one thing I also noticed was was that she was actually ahead of me. Like she wanted to read the second one, the third one at a rate that was faster than she and I had been reading.
Right.
And she wasn't faking it. She was legitimately interested in the story. And that when we talk about modeling what it means to love reading, I don't even know if she realized it, but I was noticing and picking up on, how into it she was into the storyline, and it made me pick up the book and read beyond where we left off.
Neat.
So I could catch up, so yeah, I think all of those little moments of reading with kids is really important. And also, I have a lot of parents who push. I make audiobook versions of some short stories with corny sound effects and stuff.
I love this. This is awesome.
And that because I want my kids to be reading more, and I want them to be reading at home and when they're not physically, in the room with me. Right. So I make audiobooks where they can hear me reading. And I've had parents ask me at back to school night, Mr. Corbitt, shouldn't they not listen to your audio version, and shouldn't they be doing all the work and they be doing the reading? And my response to that is sometimes, but also another really important thing is when we read to people of all ages, we model fluency. And we model cadence and emphasis and dramatic reading. And these are certain things, like sometimes when my kids in school read to me, it's kind of flat and it doesn't have a lot of
expression.
Expression. Exactly. And so when we model that, we're illuminating the meaning of the text, and we're also kind of showing how to read with what we call fluency. I mean, if I were reading Shakespeare, honestly, I would want to watch a Shakespearean play, or I'd want to hear the language.
You're like in my head right now, because no, seriously, like on the tip of my tongue, because when I was in middle school and high school, and talk about showing your age, but when I got assigned a Shakespeare play, I was sitting in our living room with my father's record player, listening to the audio version of that play while I was reading it. And it was really the only way that I could truly understand what was going on. And I felt like when I was reading it, I was so in the dark by myself. So it was monumentally important for me to hear the different voices and to hear what you're saying, the expression, the cadence. I understood so much more of it. I was still reading with it, but it made a lot more sense. So it's so funny you and I are thinking the exact same thing, because that is so true.
And that's, I challenge you to share that story with your kids when they're reading Shakespeare. Show that vulnerability to them and say, hey, the first time I ever understood a Shakespeare play was when I had it, when I was listening to it, and the first time I understood a Shakespeare play was I was a junior in high school, and my English teacher, Howard Glatt, was reading Othello out loud to us, and for the first time, it made sense to me.
Thank you, Howard.
Honest, yeah. So you're right. But no, like I just couldn't do it until it was modeled for me.
Yeah. So it's a good point that it doesn't. We don't have to wait for Shakespeare to do that kind of thing. With our children, it can be these short stories, and they're gaining something from it. And it may be cadence, and it may be expression, and it may be fluency, but it also might be understanding, because as we know, many kids learn differently, and not every child is going to read something and retain it. Some need to hear it happening. Other people are going to read the book and then see the movie, and everything's going to come to fruition in their head, and they're going to go, oh, now I get it. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. That's great.
So give us your top crucial tip. Your top tip that you would want parents and teachers to come away with today about getting our kids to love reading?
So I'm gonna challenge parents out there, and I think the first step, because I really think modeling is so important for kids and reading with kids. I think the first step for parents is not for the kids to do the work, it's for the parents to do the work. And I know that's hard, I know it's messy, but we need to start reading more. We need to pick up books. We need to get interested. We need to read books that we think we could recommend to our kids. As parents, as teachers, there's a lot of prior work that goes into this than simply putting a book in a kid's hand. I know that's not the easiest answer to hear. I know that's not a quick tip. But if we are going to take the idea seriously of being models for reading and modeling what it means to read a lot and enjoy reading and sitting down with our kids, and we need to read ourselves more. And it doesn't need to be as daunting as like novels on novels on novels. Like I told you, I read very slowly. I'm a very slow reader. I do not like devour books on a weekly basis.
I know I'm not that way either.
But, no, I mean, but we could start off with short stories, or or if we haven't read we don't need to read the book first necessarily. We can go through that experience together with a child and read it together for the first time. Be surprised together.
Yes.
Be
so much
curious together. That's a lot of fun. So I want to challenge parents to kind of walk the walk, and not just expect something from our kids that we're not willing to do ourselves.
It's true. And of course, so many of us are online ourselves. We're on our phones. We're needing to keep up with schedules, and we're working from home. I mean, I am working from home. So my kids see me on the computer. They see my husband on the computer all the time. And it is important for them to see us reading actual books as well. I mean, we read every night with our kids, but, seeing that. And I feel like as far as creating a culture, it's interesting because when we go on vacation, all four of us are reading because that's what we do. Like we're on vacation, we're sitting in a lounge chair, reading by the ocean. Like that's good stuff. And they're doing it too. And I feel like they've now associated bedtime and vacations with reading because that's what we do. Yep. So it's interesting that you say that.
And just, I think there's definitely a place for the, amusement parks and the high, but, there is something beautiful about, having a vacation be quiet, and unplugging and wherever that might be. Even if it's a staycation at home, just kind of a day where, you play board games, you read, you actually, you talk, you see each other. Just having that time to kind of, just be.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Give us the resource of the week. Give us where people can learn more about you. Give us your Twitter handle. Give us your website. Where can people read about you, learn about you, and follow you?
Sure. I'm pretty active, just trying to always share out teaching and parenting resources on Twitter. My handle is Alex_Corbitt, Corbitt. And I try and be active on there. And then my website, where I have some articles that I've written and other reading resources, is just simply alexcorbitt.com. So alexcorbitt.com.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed our time together today, and I want to thank you for bringing up these incredibly important points. Such interesting information, and I love what you've been saying about going further with the modeling. I mean, not just hey, you need to read, but also let's talking about reading with our children, allowing them to see that we're vulnerable at times, making sure that they have books around them to just pick up, and also understanding that their interests may be different from yours, to just make sure we have those in there. I love all of those things, and your tips and your scripts have been extremely valuable today. So thank you for being here on our show.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. I learned a lot with you. That was fun.
Oh, so much fun. Well, I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I know you have yours, so let's discuss them. Let's come up on Facebook, go to the Dr. Robyn Silverman page. Let's chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com, and certainly on Twitter, because we'll be talking about it. Alex and I will be talking about it as going sort of back and forth about this particular podcast. And my Twitter handle is Dr. Robyn. And if you love this podcast like I did, I hope you will go up to iTunes, rate and review it so that other people can learn about these outstanding solutions. Please share it. Let people know about it, because reading can be a struggle for people and they want to hear these tips. So that's all the time we have for today, my fellow parents, leaders, and educators. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. So many great podcasts up there. There's going to be show notes up there for Alex Corbitt as well. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even on the days when you fall short, you've got this. I know sometimes you're going to pull your hair out because your kid is not reading what you wanted to read. He's not reading enough. I get it. You're here. You're getting the information you need. I know it's not easy, but never forget there's always tomorrow. Parenting, thankfully, is the ultimate do-over. I see you. I'm right there with you. And as there are moments when we doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet sanity, please know you're 10 times the parent you think you are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please tune in again and keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.